What if I told you that the most dangerous battles are not fought with bombs or bullets, but with silence, secrets, and shadows? This is not just a story about two nations. It's a story of betrayals, inked in backroom deals, of alliances once formed, now fractured, of power plays wrapped in prophecy, and tension that crackles like thunder over dry land. Many talk about Iran and Israel as if they've always been enemies, but few know how close they once stood. Fewer still understand what changed and why those changes matter now more than ever. In the next few minutes, we won't just scroll through history, we'll walk through it, through secret operations, nuclear whispers, proxy wars, and political chessboards stretching from ancient Persia to modern Tel Aviv. You'll hear the untold, the uncomfortable, the truths buried beneath headlines, and the moments that shape the Middle East as we know it. Beware, once you open the door to understanding, you cannot close it again. This is not just a timeline. This is the pulse of a region still waiting to exhale. Stay with me. The story begins now. In the mid-20th century, Iran and Israel were not adversaries. In fact, they shared a quiet but strategic partnership rooted in mutual interest. During the reign of Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi, Iran recognized the importance of a strong regional alliance against growing Arab nationalism and the influence of Soviet-backed regimes. Israel, surrounded by hostility, found in Iran a crucial friend on the periphery. Together, they engaged in secret arms deals, intelligence sharing, and even joint military projects, like the now declassified Project Flower, a collaboration involving missile development. So, it's an interesting. Iran supplied Israel with vital oil, and in return, received advanced Israeli weapons and technological assistance. This pragmatic alliance, though unofficial, was robust and deeply strategic. However, this cooperation came to a sudden halt in 1979. The Islamic Revolution transformed the Iranian regime from a monarchy into a theocratic republic under Ayatollah Khomeini. With that shift, Iran's entire worldview changed. The new leadership viewed Israel not as a partner, but as an oppressor and illegitimate entity occupying Muslim land. The ideological foundation of the Islamic Republic included strong opposition to Zionism, aligning itself with the Palestinian cause, and the broader resistance narrative against Western-backed regimes. Where the Shah had been secular and pro-Western, Khomeini's regime was fiercely anti-imperialist and framed Israel as a symbol of Western colonialism in the Middle East. Iran's foreign policy, post-revolution, became deeply rooted in ideology, and its rejection of Israel became central to its regional identity. The two nations, once covert collaborators, found themselves on opposing ends of an escalating regional power struggle. This reversal laid the foundation for decades of hostility, shaping the modern geopolitical map of the Middle East. Israel now considered Iran a growing threat, while Iran saw itself as a defender of oppressed Muslims, particularly Palestinians and Lebanese, against Israeli aggression. The shift from cooperation to enmity was not just political, but profoundly ideological, marking a turning point that continues to define Middle Eastern conflict today. The Iran-Russia conflict has rarely played out through direct military confrontation. Instead, both nations have relied on proxy forces and indirect methods to exert influence and counter each other across the Middle East. Iran's strategy is focused on building a network of non-state actors aligned with its revolutionary ideals. Chief among them is Hezbollah, the Shiite militant and political organization based in Lebanon. Since its emergence in the early 980s, Hezbollah has received significant financial, military, and logistical support from Tehran. It serves as Iran's forward base near Israel's northern border and has been involved in numerous cross-border skirmishes and missile attacks against Israeli targets. Beyond Hezbollah, Iran has extended its influence through groups in Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and Gaza. In Gaza, it has supported Hamas and Islamic Jihad. Sunni Palestinian groups that oppose Israel's existence. While differing in sectarian identity, these groups share a common enemy, and Iran has leveraged this alignment to extend its reach into the Palestinian territories. This strategic use of proxy forces allows Iran to challenge Israel without exposing itself to direct retaliation on its own soil. Israel, in response, has adopted a doctrine of preemptive and targeted strikes, often focusing on Iranian military infrastructure and weapon shipments in Syria. The Syrian civil war created an opportunity for Iran to expand its military footprint, prompting Israel to carry out hundreds of airstrikes in recent years to limit Iran's entrenchment. These strikes, though rarely acknowledged by Israel officially, have targeted weapons depots, convoys, and even senior commanders. The use of proxy forces adds complexity to the conflict, blurring the lines between state and non-state warfare. It fuels instability in fragile regions, drawing in local populations and governments into broader geopolitical rivalries. This indirect confrontation has widened the battlefield from Lebanon to Gaza to Syria and even Yemen. It also increases the risk of miscalculation, where a single strike or retaliation by a proxy group could trigger a broader escalation between the two powers operating behind the scenes. Prior to 1979, Iran and Israel shared a surprisingly cooperative relationship. Under Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, Iran was one of the few Muslim-majority countries to maintain open ties with Israel, including diplomatic representation and economic cooperation. The two nations shared common interests, particularly in countering Arab nationalism and Soviet influence in the region. Israel benefited from Iranian oil exports, and both states exchanged intelligence and defense technologies. This pragmatic alliance was rooted more in geopolitics than ideology, reflecting a mutual understanding of their isolated positions in a hostile neighborhood. That equation changed overnight with the Islamic Revolution of 1979. The overthrow of the Shah and the rise of Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini introduced a radically different worldview. The new Iranian regime rejected Israel's legitimacy entirely, branding it the little Satan alongside the great Satan label it gave to the United States. This ideological shift was not just rhetoric. It represented a fundamental restructuring of Iran's foreign policy. The Islamic Republic positioned itself as a staunch defender of Palestinian rights and an opponent of Western-backed regimes, with Israel cast as a symbol of imperialism and oppression in the Muslim world. In the decades that followed, Iran actively supported militant groups opposing Israel, notably Hezbollah in Lebanon, and later factions within Gaza. These alliances were seen by Tehran as part of its broader resistance axis against perceived Western hegemony. Israel, in turn, began viewing Iran as an existential threat rather than a distant political adversary. Title, Interview. This perception deepened in the 1990s and early 2000s, particularly as Iran's nuclear program became a global concern. The revolution also introduced a religious dimension to the conflict. Iran's leadership framed its opposition to Israel as not only political, but also spiritual, often invoking Islamic duty and revolutionary justice. This fusion of ideology and geopolitics made reconciliation increasingly difficult. Unlike earlier disputes in the region, based largely on land or power, the Iran-Israel divide was now rooted in incompatible worldviews. One side saw itself as the vanguard of Islamic resistance, the other as a liberal democracy, defending its sovereignty against encroaching extremism. Iran's strategic use of proxy groups has significantly altered the dynamics of Middle Eastern geopolitics and has been central to its posture toward Israel. Since the early 1000s, 980 ESTs, Tehran has invested heavily in building and supporting non-state actors across the region, with Hezbollah in Lebanon being the most prominent. By providing funding, training, and advanced weaponry, Iran has enabled these groups to operate as extensions of its foreign policy, effectively surrounding Israel with hostile forces without direct confrontation. This approach allows Iran to exert influence far beyond its borders and sustain pressure on Israel without triggering full-scale war. Hezbollah, in particular, has grown into a formidable military and political force in Lebanon, with tens of thousands of rockets aimed at Israeli territory. The group's involvement in conflicts beyond Lebanon, such as in Syria alongside Iranian Revolutionary Guards, has further enhanced its capabilities and reach. Iran has also backed Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza, encouraging their resistance against Israeli control and shaping the conflict into a broader ideological and regional struggle. These alliances are not merely tactical, but are grounded in shared opposition to Israel's existence and Western influence in the region. Israel's response to this proxy network has been both defensive and preemptive. The country has invested heavily in missile defense systems like the Iron Dome to protect civilian populations from rocket fire. Simultaneously, Israel has conducted numerous covert operations, cyber attacks, and airstrikes targeting Iranian infrastructure and supply routes in Syria, aiming to disrupt the transfer of weapons to Hezbollah and other militant groups. These operations are part of what Israeli officials call the campaign between the wars, a shadow conflict meant to contain Iran's reach without open warfare. The ongoing proxy war has raised the stakes in the region significantly. Any local flare-up in Lebanon, Gaza, or Syria has the potential to spiral into a larger regional conflict, drawing in international actors and threatening fragile political balances. The asymmetric nature of Iran's strategy makes it difficult to counter without risking wider escalation, while Israel's aggressive countermeasures are seen by Tehran as justification for continuing its support to proxy forces. The involvement of the United States has been a pivotal factor in shaping the Iran-Rezaret conflict, serving as both a deterrent and an instigator, depending on perspective. But since the establishment of Israel in 1948, the U.S. has maintained an unwavering alliance with the Israeli state, providing military aid, diplomatic backing, and intelligence support. This alliance intensified after the 1979 Iranian Revolution, when Iran transformed from a U.S. ally under the Shah to a fierce ideological adversary under Ayatollah Khomeini. The revolution marked a turning point, placing Iran in direct opposition to American influence in the region and, by extension, to Israel. Over the decades, U.S. policy has oscillated between containment and confrontation. Economic sanctions on Iran, particularly those aimed at its nuclear program, have been a central strategy. These sanctions, along with military threats and the designation of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organization, have deepened the divide between Washington and Tehran. Meanwhile, U.S. financial and military assistance has enabled Israel to maintain its qualitative military edge, including access to cutting-edge technology, missile defense systems, and intelligence sharing platforms that have proved critical in Israel's ability to counter Iranian proxies. However, American involvement hasn't been limited to direct support. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan created power vacuums that Iran capitalized on to expand its influence through Shiite militias and political alliances. At the same time, global powers like Russia and China have taken divergent stances, with Russia often coordinating with Iran in Syria, and China seeking economic ties with both Iran and Israel. These shifting global alliances complicate the conflict further, as regional tensions now intersect with broader global rivalries. The Iran-Israel conflict, therefore, cannot be viewed in isolation. It's part of a larger web of international interests, strategies, and power plays. The United States' role as a key ally of Israel and a staunch opponent of Iran situates it as both a stabilizing and destabilizing force. Depending on the angle of analysis, this involvement ensures that any escalation in the region carries global repercussions, making diplomacy increasingly complex and critical. The Iran-Israel conflict, though often perceived through the lens of statecraft and military strategy, has had a profound and lasting impact on regional stability and the daily lives of civilian populations across the Middle East. As both nations engage in covert operations, cyber warfare, and proxy battles, it is the ordinary people, many of whom have no stake in the geopolitical game, who bear the greatest burden. Countries like Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen have found themselves entangled in the conflict through non-state actors supported by Iran or targeted by Israel, creating an environment of chronic instability where ceasefires are temporary and peace remains elusive. Lebanon's Hezbollah, a prominent Iranian proxy, has turned southern Lebanon into a flashpoint for clashes with Israel, placing Lebanese civilians in the crossfire whenever tensions escalate. In Syria, Iranian-backed militias and Israeli airstrikes contribute to an already fractured nation, delaying reconstruction and displacing families anew. Iraq's post-war fragility has allowed Iranian influence to permeate its institutions, while retaliatory strikes, often unclaimed, have created a climate of fear and uncertainty. Yemen, though geographically distant from Israel, remains a stage for Iran's influence through the Houthis, further extending the reach of this ideological and strategic confrontation. In addition to physical conflict, economic hardship compounds the suffering. Sanctions, while aimed at regimes, often affect the populace by triggering inflation, medicine shortages, and restricted access to international markets. Infrastructure in conflict-prone regions becomes collateral damage, and the promise of progress is deferred yet again. Moreover, the psychological toll, fear, trauma, and a pervasive sense of insecurity has become a generational inheritance in many communities. This complex web of instability reverberates far beyond the borders of Iran and Israel. The conflict's ripple effects undermine efforts at regional cooperation, stall peace processes, and embolden extremist groups that thrive in power vacuums and chaos. Even when direct clashes are avoided, the persistent tension poisons diplomatic initiatives and leaves little room for compromise. Civilian populations caught between ideologies and military ambitions continue to suffer the consequences of a conflict they did not choose, yet endure in silence. And so, as we look back at the unfolding chapters of this complex and turbulent relationship, one thing becomes clear. This is not merely a conflict between two nations, but a reflection of the deeper fractures that shape the politics, identity, and aspirations of an entire region. From the early days of diplomacy to the silent wars waged in the shadows, every move, every decision has echoed far beyond borders, rippling through history and into the lives of millions. In this long and tangled story, it's easy to lose sight of the human cost, the lost opportunities, and the shared dreams buried beneath decades of fear and mistrust. Yet understanding this history isn't about choosing sides. It's about recognizing the lessons that history offers us, the warnings it whispers, and the bridges it still invites us to build. Peace isn't born from power, but from perspective, from the courage to look beyond the noise and hear the unheard stories. Thank you for joining us on this journey through time, truth, and tension. May we all seek knowledge, not conflict. And as you walk away from this message, may you carry forward the wisdom of history and the hope for a better, more united tomorrow. Good luck, and may your voice always echo with purpose.